and welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. Today we're going to discuss the steel sector. That is where all the action is these days. Lots of capacity addition that has happened and is happening. To know more what's happening in this sector and how important is for India, which is looking at huge investments in infrastructure in the future. And also currently, of course, a lot of infrastructure projects happening. I have with me to discuss all of this and more, Ma'am Aruna Sharma. As you all know, she is an IS officer who served as Secretary, Ministry of Steel. Of course, she was very famously Secretary in the Ministry of Communications and IT too, but today we will talk about the steel sector. Good to see you, ma'am, again, and looking forward to some interesting insights.
Same here. Please go ahead.
At the outset, I remember interviewing you in 2017 too, where we spoke of the National Steel Policy 2017. How far have we come from them? If you could recap it for the viewers in the next 2 to 3 minutes.
Absolutely, because in 2017, when we made the policy, we had not even touched 100 million tons. We were around 85 million tons to 19 million tons, what you call installed steel making capacity. And in the policy, we were targeting at 300 million tons by 2030. I'm very happy to say and observe today that by March 23, we have already reached 154 million tons. And under construction capacity addition, which will be operative by financial year 26, is going to be 194 million tons. So in a way, we will be touching 200 million tons by 2026, and by 30, we'll be adding on. But what is being now incited by the Ministry of Steel, and rightly so, that the new investment, which will go ahead from 194 to that of 300, it has to be more stepping towards going for green steel. So in the sense, the more focus on the DRI routes, the more focus on the gas-based, so that today, which is combustion or fuel-based, fossil fuel-based, which contributes to the emission of pollutant gases maximum, how it can be reduced and how incentivizing can be done for the DRI and the gas route. So in the sense now, today on the present day, the minister and his team is rightly focusing on this angle for the another addition of 100 million tons. Similarly, if I'd say at that time, we used to always talk of reverse engineering. If there is a demand, there will always be a production. And at that time, the consumption of steel in India was 56 kg per capita when our population was 101.3. Today, our population is 1.4, but yet per capita consumption has already reached 81 kg per capita, which is such a big jump year on year, is nearly 37%. And this 81 kg per capita, you will be happy to know, is exactly a 50% figure of what is targeted by 2030, where the consumption is being targeted at 162 kg per capita. So if you look at it, it is very much going in the right direction as per the steel policy. And this happened because of the government focus on the infrastructure and the major correction which was done in the general financial rules, where the life cycle cost, the life word was introduced, the life cycle, so that it became more tilted towards steel while calculating the tender costs. Today you see that steel intensive infra projects you see everywhere, like starting from the airports to that of the road constructions, to that of building constructions, to that of fast construction, whether you see Pragati Maidan or even if you see the new parliament.
So I remember you sharing with us some years ago, and you said that all your new airports that will come up will be 100% steel structures with a 300-year lifespan, so to speak. When you said that, and if you see also in other areas, when you said buildings, and you now cited Pragati Maidan, roads also in equal measure, railways, one of the largest consumers of steel, I remember you pushed for inclusion of domestic manufacturers in steel consumption by Ministry of Railways too. Do you think the government is going with a single-minded focus of ensuring that more and more domestic steel is used rather than imported steel being pushed?
Yes, very much they are going against towards it, but there are some pain points in the sense like the imports, which the China does the dumping. What is very important is there are some fluctuating policies on anti-dumping and countervailing duty against China, and now needed against Indonesia also, because now China is not investing in new plants, but is investing cross-border. So many of the plants across the globe are owned by China. So in the numbers, it may come as if you are importing from Indonesia, but then the true story is it's an import from the China. So it is very important that WTO compliant, what is needed in anti-dumping or countervailing duty has to be honored, has to be consistent, because it comes up with a lot of research by the concerned director in the Ministry of Commerce. Now, sudden changing it, you know what it resulted in? In stainless steel, the imports went up by 177%, 177%. Now, that has been a hit to domestic steel. Similarly, when you do a calculation, you are making steel in India very expensive. If you look in the plant itself, we make the cheapest steel in the world. But outside the plant, if you add on to the cost of logistics, to the transportation delays and problems, to the power structure, the cost of the power that is being paid, to that of the credit available, and worst of worst, there is royalty on the iron ore. So in the sense, when auction is taking place, Indian Bureau of Mines calculates by adding all the taxes. And when mining is done, again a royalty is charged to it. So it's like a double charge. So these are some irritant points where if these are facilitated, corrected, and taken into the right direction, then definitely domestic production will get much more accelerated, will be cheaper in cost, so that the infra cost will also come down. Because international coking coal cost goes up, the steel price goes up because we import it. And when this price goes up, then everybody says, oh, steel is becoming expensive and therefore infra cost is going skyrocketing high. But the solution lies here that you take care of the anti-dumping countervailing duty. You do this correction of royalty and royalty corrections. This will stabilize the steel prices in India for domestic use and bring down the cost considerably. If you take care of the logistics, transportation, power cost into this, then yes, India is a bright spot in the world, and this is going to make the whole difference.
I also want to understand from you. You said the duty structure needs to be seen. When we negotiate free trade agreements, also that is a matter of concern, because if a country that we negotiate a FTA with has huge investments from China, then we end up giving a free pass to China for imports in that case. So do you think our whole policy needs to be geared up towards ensuring that India doesn't in any way become a dumping ground for dumping from other countries?
Absolutely right. You have hit on the bullseye, because the Ministry of Steel always has been arguing that steel should be kept out for these kind of whether bilateral or multilateral agreements, which gives a free trade. Because, and that is why RCEP was objected to considerably by this particular ministry. And similarly, in the bilateral trades, this is a matter of concern, a great concern, especially European countries and other countries, because it is not going to tilt in favor of India. So it is very important that when we are doing these duties, and if you do the analysis of the FTA agreement we had with Korea and Japan, the imports have been very, very heavy. It suits Korea to manufacture till a first stage, that is what you call the downstream, in Korea itself, and then sort of import it in India and do a value addition to it. Whereas if these kind of FTA agreement was not there, they would have been motivated to invest in India itself, to do the downstream making of the steel, what you call as a hot rolled coil. And that makes a lot of difference. So if you look at the import figures is more in the stainless steel. It adds to the number, a small percentage of the total 154 capacity, what I'm telling about. And what we consume, 90% of the steel produced. And what is imported ranges from 8 to 10%. And what we export also ranges from 8 to 10%. So in this 8% what we import, or 10% what sometimes we import, it's the hot roll coil coming from Korea, coming from Japan. It also calls about in stainless steel from China in a very, very big way. And that is a matter of concern. And that has to be tackled by smart play of WTO compliant. And India always had a history to comply with the WTO norms of anti-dumping and countervailing duties, and not suddenly come up with either cancellation or addition of some duty to the exports, as has happened in the past. But I'm very happy that correction has been done, at least in the export duty, but anti-dumping battle still goes on, especially for stainless steel.
I want to understand from you this thing. When you said the target of 300 million tons, will we see more addition of greenfield and new capacity in the coming 2-3 years?
The ministry targets for that, and they have made some 7-8 task forces which are working towards it as to how the government through its policy can incentivize to ensure that future investments are more towards production of green steel, as well as the correction measures in the present way of production to reduce down the pollutants that are released in the air. So I think it's a very, very good step that in a couple of months back, government has taken, and they are coming up, they're working towards it, and that will pave the way of what to invest. And this is very important if you look at it from the world steel angle as well, because the day will not be far off when there will be sort of a ban on non-green steel when we are exporting, or there will be some penalties if we are adding to the pollution or if we are not doing it. So we are number 2 in the world in steel production, and will continue to be number 2, I think, ever, because China is far ahead than us. And we have no intention, and we should not have, to reach the capacity of 800 million tons. 300 million tons year on year, I think good enough. We can stabilize there for some couple of years and maybe jump from there. So that is what is going to make a difference.
Yeah, so you shared the point about China. Now we move ahead to other sphere. What are the challenges you see going forward related to capacity addition and the growth story in the steel sector, and how can we overcome them?
See, if you look at it, what I mentioned before as a reverse engineering, if the demand increases, then definitely it is a big incentive to continue to add on to the capacity for steel production. And India being a low infra country, definitely we need a lot of infrastructure to add to our growth story. So the infrastructure investment, rightly so, the government is doing to a tune of 5 lakh to 6 lakh crores per annum in the budget, which is a very, very good thing. And that will incentivize steel production and other related core sectors. So with that kind of a jump, the capacity is bound to increase. We will reach and stabilize at 300 million tons. There's no doubt about it. And India will be one story, which I always say, that we will break the ice ceiling of being called a cyclical industry. We will not be a cyclical industry. We will not incur the loss. The graph may come down and go up depending on international coking coal prices as to what margin we done. But the challenge major lies is our logistic cost is too high, right? And that is something under our control. And that has to be reduced. And technology-wise, the Ministry of Steel is talking to the Ministry of Railways to get right of way for slurry pipelines, because that is going to make the whole difference, that the transportation, and it will be very helpful to railways also, because they come under great pressure for rakes arrangement between the power sector and the steel sector. So if the steel shifts to the slurry pipeline, of course, the finished goods will continue to go with the railways, And it will not be a loss to the business of the railways, because more the cost of reduction in the logistics, more the production, more the finished good transport will go through the railways. So railway business is going to increase more and more as we go from 154 to 300 million tons. But the input cost will considerably come down. So that is one way of doing it. Second way of doing it is what I mentioned before, is credit availability. So the kind of PLI schemes that are put forward, if they push the green steel and give the correct kind of incentives, that will be very helpful to bring down the cost. And the third most important thing is that the coking coal, now that the import duty has come down, because sometimes it's very funny, on the import cost, which we don't have in India, there was an import duty of 2.5%. So you are unnecessarily making the input more expensive. So now that 2.5 has come down. So if we logically work upon is that input cost is less and shift to mode of scrap, which the Ministry of Steel recently is focusing quite a lot of a combination of scrap, pellets, and iron ore. All this will go a long way to bring down the cost of inputs. And the moment the input costs come down, the cost of steel will also stabilize. The only fluctuating factor with that will be the coking coal price, because we are still dependent on coking coal.
One last question I want to ask you. India, if you compare to the developed countries of the world, is still a low infrastructure country, except for the top cities and the good highways. We have to do a lot more. Even in tier 2 towns, infrastructure barely exists. This shows that the next 50, 60 years, India is just going to be on a, if you can afford it, of course. India is about $2,800 per capita. Unless we go to 7,000-8,000, we don't even have the money to put in. So do you think this story goes in tandem in India's GDP grows and investment in infrastructure continues to go up and up and up?
See, it's like that. You invest, you put the food where the mouth is. So if you invest in infrastructure, it triggers the production, it triggers the access. The three axes I always talk about. One is by road, one is by internet, and one is the financial inclusion. So if these three axes we do, it triggers the production in all sectors. So whether we call MSMEs through e-commerce and connectivity and all that, and that will add on to the GDP. That will generate more money, and then more money will be available for infrastructure. So it is very, very important not to ignore on the infrastructure. We need top-class infrastructure, top class. There's the bridges, the airports, the buildings, whether the more composite buildings, whether we are going for these high sustainable quality inputs. And because they are steel intensive, you are going to reduce considerably in the maintenance cost. That's a big advantage. So when you call life cycle, that's exactly what we mean, because you reduce in the maintenance cost, and that maintenance cost, when you reduce, is the more money, like saving is an earning. So that more money is available to pump in the infrastructure. So this growth story has to go on, because 1.4 millions you cannot feed by doles.
Basically,
you can feed them to make them earning. Yeah.
So basically, you're saying steel in India is the next 4 or 5 decade story. If the growth is
yes.
Before we plateau, we are going to grow for 4 or 5 decades.
Yes, and we'll plateau around 300 to 350 to 400 million tons.
And that will happen by 2040.
Yes, by 2030 we'll reach 300. Then depending on the consumption cycle, how it is growing and what's happening. Like today, it's wonderful. We have hit the 50% of what is being targeted for 2030. So depending on that, there may be the next jump that one can target for the steel sector. No doubt about it. And we have capability to produce. What we are dependent is only two things. The capital goods, that is the plant machinery. In India, it is still not at the level of manufacturing. And of course, the coking coal, for which an alternative of gas, hydrogen, or syngas will be coming in future very soon. So in the sense, we are moving in the right way, right direction, step by step. And the ministry's focus I've seen in last 1 or 2 years is absolutely targeted into these problem areas or pain points and attempting to resolve it. So I think that's a welcome thing. Very big welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving an insight into where are we headed in the steel sector. It is a growth story through and through, as you suggested. There is lots more to come. A lot of steel production to happen more and more to reach 300 million tons, and lots more of investment in infrastructure. It started with our metro cities, went to tier 1. Now it will be in tier 1 and tier 2. We'll see huge investments. I think the India growth story is firmly poised to grow with the steel in tandem, as steel and infrastructure go hand in hand. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. We will request you again very shortly in a couple of weeks to know more about the challenges around the infrastructure sector and the kind of potential that we'll be able to unlock with some decisions taken. But I think for today, that's enough. Thank you so very much. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.